Hello and welcome to the 2022 kickoff of Badger Talks Live, which brings exciting happenings, resources, and talent from your UW flagship campus to the people of Wisconsin and beyond. My name is Carlos Dávalos. I'm a reporter from Mexico City, and I'm currently a fellow at the PhD program at the School of Journalism and Mass Communication here at UW-Madison. Today it is my pleasure to introduce Wisconsin Public Radio's Special Projects reporter, Bridgit Bowden. Today, Bridgit will be sharing some of her investigative reporting for projects like the WPR Reports Mapped Out podcast. You will hear about the balance between breaking news and stories that give broader context, how she gets public figures and everyday people to confide in her favorite interviews, and what might be the next as she follows the story of redistricting in Wisconsin. Bridget's work has appeared in places such as NPR, Al Jazeera America, and the Kansas City Star. She's a graduate of the Missouri School of Journalism with a degree in convergence radio reporting, and producing. Please help me welcome Bridgit Bowden.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Carlos. I really appreciate it. And first of all, I just want to thank Badger Talks for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of my work and some of what we do at Wisconsin Public Radio, which, as some of you may know, is right on campus in Vilas Hall, although that's not where I'm coming from today. This is my home office, but before the pandemic, I would be coming to you from Vilas Hall. Thanks so much to WPR listeners and WPR members. We wouldn't be here without you. So I do want to give a shout out to all of our wonderful listeners and members. You guys are the best. So just a little bit about me to kick us off. My name is Bridgit Bowden. I am the special projects reporter on the news team at Wisconsin Public Radio. Wisconsin Public Radio is a statewide network of public radio stations, and we are headquartered in Madison, right in Vilas Hall. Our news team is where I work. We have a group of reporters based in bureaus all over the state. I'm based in Madison, and I, again, am the special projects reporter. I started at WPR in 2015 as the Mike Simonson Memorial Investigative Reporting Fellow. And then in 2016, I was hired on as the first special projects reporter. So special projects is kind of interesting in the news world because I don't have a particular beat that I cover. So I have covered all sorts of topics, everything from politics, criminal justice, the environment, arts, health, and occasionally I even get to cover breaking news. So most of the time I am working on projects that are more in-depth, more investigative, and often they can take up to a year to finish. So today I'm going to talk about some of the projects I've been working on. Specifically, I'm going to spend most of my time talking about our efforts in podcasting, because one of the major things that I have done at WPR is to bring a sort of documentary style podcasting to the station. So let's start with podcasts. Most of you, I'm sure, know about podcasts, but I do just want to talk about why we like podcasts, why we make podcasts, and really what they are in case you're not super familiar. So podcasting is very exciting. It is on-demand audio. So basically you can subscribe to your favorite shows and right on your phone, and you can listen to them whenever you want. So, in the past, if you wanted to listen to your favorite radio show, you would have to make sure to tune in exactly when it was going to be on the air. With podcasting, you can tune in whenever you want, whether you're walking your dog or at the gym, doing the dishes. So it's really great to just be able to meet people where they are and bring you the stories that are important for you to know wherever you are. So there are lots of different kinds of podcasts. Everything from unscripted chat podcasts where you have a couple hosts just talking to each other about whatever subject. They could be talking about sports or I listen to a podcast that's about Broadway shows, but it's unscripted chat, and just it's like you're with your friends, just kind of talking about things that interest you. There are interview podcasts. If you listen to Fresh Air, I think you have a host interviewing a guest. Oftentimes those are edited. And then another kind would be a highly produced documentary podcast, and that is what I do. So these are podcasts that are scripted. We write out every word before we record it, and we produce it. So we have music, and we have different tape elements, so audio that we've recorded either from interviews or from press conferences, that sort of thing. And we sort of blend it all together into one cohesive documentary. That's what I do at WPR. We do make several different kinds of shows at WPR, documentary like my podcast. We have the WPR Politics podcast, which is more of a chat style show, but they talk about the latest in Wisconsin politics, and it's a great show. I also want to shout out Beta, which is a great show that we have about arts, pop culture, and technology. So I want to make sure that I shout out WPR's other podcasts, because there are plenty more other than mine. But I'm going to spend the next little while talking about two podcasts that I have worked on. The first is called Derailed, and it came out in 2019. But I would still encourage you, if you have not listened to it, I think that it stands the test of time. So I think that you could listen if you haven't yet. So Derailed is a podcast about the planned high-speed rail line between Madison and Milwaukee that was canceled after the 2010 elections in Wisconsin. So some of you may remember this. You may remember seeing this in the news. We knew in 2019 that we wanted to sort of break into the world of narrative documentary podcasting. And so we thought about what kinds of stories could we tell. And we talked about a lot of different possibilities, and we landed on the story of this train. I'm going to play you a few clips from the show and talk about them. But yeah, that's the basic overview of the story. Is there was a high-speed rail line that was planned between Madison and Milwaukee, and then it was canceled. And I will play you the very beginning. It's November 2nd, 2010, election night, the midterms. President Barack Obama won big just 2 years ago, but tonight, Republicans are looking to make a comeback. One by one, states on the map turn red. By the end of the night, Republicans gain 63 seats in the House of Representatives and 6 in the Senate. They pick up governorships in 6 states. One of those states is Wisconsin. That governor, Scott Walker. It's his birthday that night.
Thank you.
Walker's a preacher's kid from Delavan, Wisconsin. He served as a state representative and then as Milwaukee County executive. And he's made some big promises during this campaign. He promised to cut taxes. He promised to create jobs. And he promised to put an end to a planned high-speed rail line between Madison and Milwaukee.
In this podcast, we're going to tell you the story of this train. And we'll start off with a spoiler. It doesn't exist. Walker did put an end to it.
So if we already know how this story ends, why go back? Why now?
There is something about this train that gets people's blood boiling, even 10 years later. People on both sides of this issue care.
Over the next few weeks, we'll ask, what is it about this train? We'll explore where the idea was born, how it unraveled. We'll even leave the state to explore what this saga says about our politics and how Wisconsin has changed. From Wisconsin Public Radio, I'm Sean Johnson.
And I'm Bridgit Bowden. This is Derailed. All right, so before I get any farther, I should mention that both of the podcasts I'm going to talk about today are co-hosted by Sean Johnson, who is our Capitol Bureau Chief at Wisconsin Public Radio. He is my co-writer, co-reporter, co-host on all of these podcasts. He can't be here today because he's busy covering the state Senate. So I'm sure you'll all see his coverage later today. But so let's talk about Derailed. Derailed, as you just heard, is about this planned high-speed rail line that was canceled. Something that is sort of interesting is that we chose to report a story that had already happened. None of this was what you would typically consider as news. You know, it wasn't new. Everybody knew from the very beginning how the story ended. So why do that? You know, why spend so much time reporting a story that you know the ending of? We think that this story, when you give it enough time, like you have in a podcast, it shows a change in Wisconsin's political landscape over the past 2 decades. And one of the great things about podcasts is that we have so much more time in each episode than we ever do on the radio. And so by being able to take that time and really, you know, get into the nuance of these issues, I think it tells a story that helps us all understand Wisconsin's politics and how we got to where we are. So Sean and I like to say that Derailed, you know, it's a story about a train, but really it's a story about how Wisconsin has changed. And the other reason that we wanted to go after a story that was at that point 10 years old was because it allowed us to weave in all of the archival tape that we've been collecting over the last decade. As you heard in the bit that I just played, we had audio from the night Scott Walker was elected. And if you listen to all the episodes of Derailed, we have archives woven in throughout the whole thing that really take you on a journey through this 10-year story of this train. And so I think that audio is a very, it's very personal when you hear it. When you hear those archives, I think it's almost like you're there, and it gives you a better understanding of stories that happen in our state. During the reporting process for Derailed, we did quite a bit of travel. I traveled to California to see their high-speed rail construction, which if you listen to the show, you will learn that much of the money that was going to come to Wisconsin eventually did get sent to California when our project was canceled. So I went out to see how that money was spent. I went to follow the money, and it was very interesting. You know, they have a rail line that they're building that is massively behind schedule. And I spoke to people in the areas where the train will eventually go through. I met with a farmer whose land is going to be cut right in half. And I spoke with a woman who owns a restaurant very close to where the tracks are going to be. And it's just very interesting to be able, again, to take the time to follow where that money went and what's happening with it now. And so that was really great to get to go out to California and bring you that story. Sean and I also both traveled to Indiana to look for the actual trains. And I'm going to play you a clip from that episode. One second. Technical difficulty. Okay, my file's not working, so I am actually going to play it directly from the website. You may have to listen to a very quick ad at the beginning of this.
Support for Derailed comes from Sun Badger Solar, offering custom-designed solar installations across Wisconsin, as well as help navigating solar incentive programs. sunbadger.com/derailed.
Hey, this is Sean. If you haven't already heard the rest of this series, go back and start with episode 1. This story will make a lot more sense that way.
If you've listened to the last few episodes of this podcast, you know we've spent a lot of time talking about the high-speed rail line that was going to be built between Madison and Milwaukee.
But there's more to the debate, because right around the same time, Wisconsin bought 2 trains from a Spanish company called Talgo.
And the story of these trains is, look, it's messy. In a way, these trains are the physical reminder of the debate Wisconsin had almost a decade ago.
And these trains, they're not even in Wisconsin. So, we went to find them.
According to Google Maps, we're about 4 minutes away. And I'm pretty nervous.
I guess we're only nervous. I mean, we're gonna go and we're gonna ask permission and we're gonna identify ourselves. I guess we're just nervous because there's the distance between what could happen in our minds is like pretty great right now. At the upper end of things, they let us in and we're like touring the bistro car of these Talgo trains. And at the lower end of things,
The trains are not there.
that's definitely one scenario that's in the low end.
In 800 feet, turn right onto Garstang Street.
I think I see something.
Really?
I think so.
Take the next
Oh my God.
to Garstang Street.
I see it. It's red and white. Oh yeah.
There they are, there they are.
They are right up by the street.
We found the trains.
And we're going to tell you how they got where they are.
From Wisconsin Public Radio, I'm Bridgit Bowden.
And I'm Sean Johnson. This is Derailed.
So that was really fun to be able to actually go find the trains that Wisconsin spent quite a bit of money on. And the episode really tells the story of that money and what happened with these trains and why they ended up in Indiana, of all places. And actually, there was an update to that story just last week. The trains are going to be sent to Nigeria. So after being built for Wisconsin and then sitting in Indiana for a number of years, they are going to be headed to Nigeria. So if you want to know sort of how we got there, definitely check out this episode. But that was really fun to be able to travel both to California and to Indiana and really see with my own eyes what's going on with this story and to talk to people who are affected by the issues that I was reporting on. I want to play one more clip from Derailed. One of the things that was interesting about the story is that the story of the train really spans 3 governors. So it started out with Governor Tommy Thompson, who wanted to bring this high-speed rail line to Wisconsin. And then Governor Jim Doyle was the one who actually secured the funding. And then when Governor Scott Walker was elected, he was the one who eventually did cancel the project. And so we had really hoped to interview all 3 of those former governors. So we put out requests to each one of them. As reporters, we sometimes are able to predict who might say yes to our interview requests and who might say no. And I will say we were 100% wrong with our guesses on this one. We thought that Governor Thompson would say yes, and we thought that Governor Doyle would say no. We thought that Governor Walker would say yes. However, it was kind of the opposite. Governor Doyle said yes and came into our studios for an interview. Governor Walker declined our request for an interview multiple times. And Governor Tommy Thompson was a little bit elusive. We asked him multiple times, both in phone calls to his secretary, multiple emails, and sort of each time, and this is over the course of months, each time, we would get an answer like, he's interested, but get back to us. You get back to us in a few weeks, get back to us in a month. And finally, we were up against our deadline, and we knew that we needed to make sort of a last ditch effort to get him to sit down with an interview with us. And so we actually ended up sending him a letter in the mail. We wrote out just, explaining what we wanted to do, laying all of our cards out on the table, telling him why we thought it was so important that we talk to him. And he did get our letter, and he did finally say yes to an interview. So just a few weeks before our podcast launched, we had actually already written an episode about Tommy Thompson without having interviewed him. And then he did grant us that interview. We ripped up the episode that we had already written, and we put the interview in. And the interview, I think, was one of the best parts of the entire show. So I do want to play a little bit of that for you.
All right, sir. Can you just say your name for me real quick so I've got it on tape?
This is former Governor Tommy Thompson from Elroy, Wisconsin.
It's been more than 2 decades since Tommy Thompson gave that speech calling for high-speed rail in Wisconsin. He's moved on from the governor's office, but he's kept busy. He says he's either the owner, part owner, or a board member for about 24 companies, and on the weekends, he farms.
I've got 10 commitments today, and I shoehorned you in just because you were so persistent and nice, and you're dealing with a subject that I have a great deal of admiration about.
Tommy Thompson's love for trains goes way back to when he was a boy growing up in Elroy, a small town about 80 miles northwest of Madison.
People don't realize that Elroy used to be the go-between city between Chicago and Minneapolis. Trains would come up, passenger trains and freight trains would come up from Chicago and stop in Elroy, and then they would turn around and go back to Chicago, and trains from Minnesota, St. Paul, would come down and pick up the passengers or pick up the freight and take it on to Minneapolis.
Now, about Elroy, Tommy Thompson could not be prouder of his hometown. He talks about it all the time. When he was growing up, he says famous people would visit Elroy. Thompson remembers sitting on his dad's shoulders when he was 6 years old to watch Harry Truman deliver a campaign speech from the back of a train. But what Thompson remembers the most is riding the rails, starting when he was about 10, even when he wasn't supposed to.
Me and my buddies would hop onto the trains and freight trains and then ride them to the edge of town or until we got kicked off. And it's funny we didn't break a leg or an arm or a more serious accident, but I loved riding the rails for about a mile until they got up too. You had to jump off before it got going too fast or you'd get hurt. So we timed it we had a lot of experience doing it.
So when you talk about trains or building trains, rail service, all that, takes you back to Elroy.
Takes me back to my boyhood of hopping freights, just like a hobo.
So one of the great things about podcasting and in-depth reporting as compared to some of the other types of news is that you do get to really get to know the people who are in your stories. You get to really hear them as characters. So, Tommy Thompson is on our air all the time, both when he was governor and, now in the last year he's been temporary system president. But what you hear in our newscasts and from the daily news are just short snippets, a soundbite from whatever is happening in the day's news. What's great about podcasts is that you can really get to know these people. So, I never knew that he was so interested in trains and why he was so interested in trains. So it was great to be able to learn that it went back all the way to his childhood in Elroy. I just thought that was so interesting. So that is a little short snippet of our podcast, Derailed. You can, as I said, it came out in 2019, but you can still find it on your favorite podcasting app. It's also available online at wpr.org/derailed. So I would encourage you, if you found these clips interesting, to dig into the whole series. Now I am going to switch gears and talk about our other podcast called Mapped Out. And this one debuted last fall, and it's actually still in the works. We're still working on just the last episodes. So Mapped Out is a story about redistricting. And some of you may know redistricting is happening right now. And so to tell you a little bit about why we chose this story, after we did Derailed, we knew that we wanted to make another documentary style in-depth narrative podcast. And so we asked ourselves, what topic should we cover this time? And we thought it would be a great challenge and would be a great service to our audience to give this sort of treatment to something that is actually in the current news, as opposed to something that, happened 10 years ago and is completely said and done over. So we thought about, what are the biggest stories happening this year? This conversation took place about a year ago, so early 2021. So we thought about all the things that were happening in the news and sort of what we might be able to cover in this documentary style. And we landed on redistricting because it is a political process that is so important. And in many ways, lots of people don't know very much about it. It's very complicated. There's a lot of math, but it is extremely important, and it only happens once every 10 years. And the effects of redistricting, they stay for the whole decade, if not decades to come. So we thought that the topic really deserved this kind of treatment. And so we started making a podcast. Mapped Out came out in the fall, and we have so far released 7 episodes. We have at least one more episode in the works because redistricting is happening right now. It's still not completely decided what our political maps are going to look like for the next 10 years. So I have a few more clips to play from Mapped Out. I'm going to start by playing you the very beginning of the very first episode. This topic was a bit of a challenge. As I said before, it's very complicated. There's a lot of math. It's something that not a lot of people understand. So we knew that we needed to sort of immediately set the stakes and let people know why this topic is so important. And so here is our opening.
There are these terms in politics that you hear all the time. Red state, blue state, purple state.
Purple state. It's what happens when you mix the same amount of red and blue. And Wisconsin is just about as purple as they come.
Because elections here, well, the statewide elections are about as close as they get.
Take the 2020 presidential election. Almost 3.3 million people voted here, a record number. And President Joe Biden won by less than 1%.
Spread the faith. God love you all. May God bless America, and may God protect our church. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Less than 1%, just 21,000 people. You could fit almost 4 times that many people in Lambeau Field.
And the 2016 presidential race was just as close, but it went the other way. Former President Donald Trump won Wisconsin that year.
Together, we will make America great again.
His margin was about the same, around 23,000 votes, less than 1%.
In Wisconsin, sometimes Democrats win, sometimes it's Republicans. The political pendulum swings back and forth.
And it's not just races for president, like in 2018.
In case you may have forgotten, I'm Tony Evers, and I'm incredibly proud to be the 46th governor of the great state of Wisconsin.
Democrat Tony Evers beat former Republican Governor Scott Walker.
But just 4 years before that, it was Walker who came out on top.
Thank you for coming out. God bless you. Thanks for your support. And let's move on to 4 more great years.
What's another sign you might be a purple state? your elected officials can sometimes be on extreme ends of the political spectrum.
Look at our U.S. senators. They're kind of a political odd couple. You have Republican Ron Johnson, one of former President Trump's biggest supporters.
And you have Democrat Tammy Baldwin, who tried to impeach Trump twice.
But there's something that doesn't fit here. In this purple state where both parties win and power swings back and forth,
our state legislature, it's red.
It's very red. And it has been for the past decade. The pendulum never swings. But why?
A big reason? Redistricting.
In this podcast, we'll tell you how the political map Republicans drew a decade ago has helped lock in their power.
How the state's district lines were drawn in secret, with even legislators left in the dark.
How the battle over the maps went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
And how redistricting is happening again, right now. From WPR Reports, I'm Sean Johnson.
And I'm Bridgit Bowden. This is Mapped Out.
All right, so that is how we opened the podcast Mapped Out. As I've said a few times, redistricting is such a complicated topic, and pretty soon after we started writing this show, we realized that we really needed to break it down to a pretty basic level to make sure that once we get into the more complex stuff, once we get into like the various court battles over the maps and what's happening now, we need to make sure that our audience really understands what redistricting is, how it works, what gerrymandering is, how that works, and why it's important. So we asked ourselves, what's the best way to explain this topic to people who may not understand it? In a way, we need to teach them. We need to teach them a social studies lesson. So we actually decided to bring in a teacher, a civics teacher. We interviewed David Olson, who formerly was a social studies teacher at Memorial High School in Madison, and he has taught redistricting over the years in his classes. And so we sat down with him and had him explain it to us as if we were his students. And then we used that in our first episode to make sure that our audience really understood the topic before we launched into anything too complex. So I'll play you a little bit of that.
Everything we are going to talk about in this lesson and this podcast would not be possible without an event that happens once every 10 years.
And man, it is an event. Actually, you should take out your pocket constitutions right now because you all have them because I gave them to you. This is a constitutionally mandated exercise that we must enumerate our citizens. What do we call that term when we count everybody up?
It's called the U.S. Census.
So the census, this process where we count everyone, happens every decade. Why? Because the U.S. Constitution says we have to. And not to get too dramatic here, but the census is as old as American democracy itself.
And it just happened again. The census counted people last year.
So we count people, we find out where they live, and we use that information to draw maps, to do redistricting.
Redistricting. So think of it this way. Wisconsin has 8 U.S. House seats, and each seat, each member of the U.S. House, represents a district.
Those districts are like 8 puzzle pieces that cover the map of Wisconsin. Redistricting decides what those puzzle pieces will look like for the next decade.
And this happens in every single state that has more than one member of the House. It also happens in every single state for the purposes of their state legislature.
Did you catch that? Redistricting not only decides what those 8 congressional puzzle pieces are going to look like, it also slices up Wisconsin into 99 state assembly districts and 33 state senate districts.
Each of those districts, those puzzle pieces, is represented at the state capitol by people, your state representatives and your state senators.
And when we talk about the full puzzle, the way those pieces fit together, we are talking about a map, a political map.
Every 10 years, the Wisconsin Constitution requires that that map be redrawn. The puzzle pieces change because the population changes.
Okay, so think about the community where you live. Okay, have there been people moving out? Have there been new apartment buildings going up? right? Did your city get bigger or smaller in your lifetime, right? Because that's going to make a difference as to how big your district is.
So when David, Mr. Olson, talks about how big your district is, he's talking about the geographic size of the district on the map, the size of the puzzle piece.
He's not talking about the number of people, because each district has to be roughly equal in population.
This is a fundamental part of redistricting. One person, one vote. We do the census and then we divide everyone up so that every district has about the same number of people.
All right, so it was great to be able to talk to Mr. Olson and really get a teacher's explanation of such a complicated topic. As a reporter, that's not something that we get to do very often. So that's one of the great parts about documentaries and podcasting is we get the time to explain these complicated topics in fun ways that I think are really memorable. So Mapped Out, it like I said, is still in the works. We've released 7 episodes and we have at least one more in the works based on whatever happens with redistricting in the coming weeks. So I would encourage you to subscribe to both Derailed and Mapped Out. You can find them on any podcasting app. For Mapped Out, you should search for WPR Reports, Mapped Out, that's the full name. You can also find them on our website at wpr.org/derailed and wpr.org/mapped-out. I just want to give a quick shout out to our producer for both of these shows, Brad Kohlberg, and Carl Christensen, who composed the music for these both of these podcasts. They would not sound nearly as cohesive without those two. So I did want to give a special shout out to them. That is my spiel about our podcast efforts. And I'd be happy to answer your questions now.
Bridgit, thanks so much for giving us the inside scoop on these 2 awesome podcasts. Really appreciate, and I'm so shocked with how we really can sort of have a visual connection to the segments even that you shared today when you're in the car at the beginning of the Derailed segment, and you really feel like you're there with you. So it's kind of amazing to me. So great job there. Hello, everybody. Fran Paleo-Moyer, Badger Talks producer. We're talking with special projects reporter Bridgit Bowden. Bridgit, we have a question here from Susanna Michaels, who says, when it comes to Q&A, I'm curious how you wade through the huge volume of audio to find the perfect clip you want to use. And then do you have a team of people listening, and are there transcripts that are easier to browse?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So some of these interviews that we do for these podcasts are very long. We will often sit down and talk to people for more than an hour. I think our longest interview for a podcast was like 2.5 hours. So it really is like a lot of words to sift through and pick out those tiny little clips that are the real gems. So Sean and I do this work on our own. We don't, unfortunately, have a team of people going through the transcripts for us. But one thing between Derailed and Mapped Out, the software that was available for transcribing audio really got a lot better. And so whereas our interviews for Derailed had to be transcribed by hand, and the wonderful Hannah Haynes did that for us. She works at WPR. For Mapped Out, we were actually just able to put the interviews into software, and that delivered us a transcript back. But I will say that you can't just rely on the transcript when you're going through to pick out the best pieces, because you really have to know how it sounds. You have to know people's inflection and what their emotions might be that you can really only hear. So we spend a lot of time just going through the tape from the interviews and listening and talking about the various parts, and then pulling out the pieces that we like. That's kind of second piece of the process is you do the interview and then you go through and listen to it and comb through and pick out the good parts.
Very interesting. Thank you. And I'm just curious, do you know so you chose of the podcast genre for these, what you say are more in-depth, you can take more time and really research. Do you know if the audience you're reaching is different because it's a podcast versus any other channel you might be using?
Different than, say, our radio audience?
Right.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers right in front of me and the demographics right in front of me, but it is a slightly different audience. We would expect that podcast listeners would skew younger than our radio audience. But that's not to say that everyone can't enjoy podcasts.
Absolutely. And that's also a plug for our Badger Talks podcast, of which Bridgit is the interviewee on our most recent episode as well with Ben Rush. So please tune in on the Badger Talks website to capture that as well. So question for you, with this mapped out podcast, if listeners could take away one thing, what is it you're hoping for?
Yeah, I think that much like Derailed, as I said before, is a story about a train, but really is a story about how the political landscape in Wisconsin has changed. I think that Mapped Out is a story about redistricting, but really it's a story about political power. And so I hope that the audience takes away just a better understanding of how the mechanisms in which political power can be seized. Another thing is just how complicated redistricting is. That has been my personal main takeaway. It's I would say the most complex topic I've ever reported on. And so to just walk away by understanding that it is so important and yet so complex, I think is big.
Very interesting. Thank you. And can you tell, we do have teachers tuning in and we're very fortunate that Badger Talks Live has gotten shared in classrooms around the state. For our younger listeners, can you talk a little bit about how you decided that becoming a reporter was the thing you wanted to do in life?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to be a journalist from a very young age. I think that my mom suggested when I was 9 or 10 that I would be good on TV. And so that's what I wanted to do for a very long time. I sort of wanted to be Katie Couric. And it was when I was in college that I decided to kind of switch from a TV direction to a radio direction. And what interested me in public radio once I started learning more about it was that reporters on the radio do often get more time to dig into subjects and to really get into the nuance and the detail. So, that is very relevant to what I do now with special projects, because not only do I get the time that you would normally get in a regular radio story, but then I get 20 minutes on top of that.
Great. Thanks so much for that. And one last question for you. So can you tell us perhaps who your biggest inspiration is in your field and what have inspired you as a person?
Yeah, my first job, I worked at Kansas City Public Television, first job right out of college. And I worked with a reporter there named Mike McGraw, who was a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative reporter. He worked for the Kansas City Star. And we worked very closely together. And he is the one who really got me interested in investigative reporting and, digging into data and documents and looking back at archives and doing stories that can take months to a year to do. So he was the one who actually encouraged me to apply for the fellowship that brought me to Wisconsin in the first place. And I am sad to say that he unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but I would definitely say is my biggest mentor.
Well, fantastic. And I'm sure he'd certainly be very proud of you and the work that you're doing. Bridgit Bowden, thanks so much for joining us today. And thanks for sharing this great work. And we'll all look forward to the future episodes of Mapped Out. And certainly we'll tune back into some of the Derailed episodes as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, please join us on the next Badger Talks Live, Tuesday, February 15th at noon. We're going to be talking to financial planner Linda Leppy, who's going to be talking about investing and general tips for saving for the future. We thought that would be a good one to cover as everybody's getting their tax returns. Please visit us at badgertalks.wis.edu. You can check out that podcast I mentioned with our host, Ben Rush, who will be talking to Bridgit in the most recent episode. You can also see our upcoming schedule of talks. You can sign up for our email list. Please consider a donation to Badger Talks. We are grant funded, so we always appreciate that additional help. And search a roster of over 400 UWN faculty and staff who have generously signed up to donate their time to give talks around the state, both virtually and in person. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll look forward to seeing you soon.